the surprise attack on the United States Naval Base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, on the morning of December 7, 1941 by the Japan Empire, is one of the most important moments of participation of the United States in the history of World War II. The Pearl Harbor Naval Base is the largest U.S. fleet in the Asia-Pacific region that was built in 1908 and houses the largest U.S. warships. The Japanese Army managed to destroy nearly 20 U.S. naval vessels, including attacking 8 major warships and 200 aircraft. A total of over 2,000 U.S. citizens were killed with over 1,000 injured. This attack by the Japanese Empire was the culmination of the tension of the conflict between these two countries with failed diplomatic negotiations. Back in 1937 to 1941, the conflict between China and Japan caused the U.S. to intervene, and in 1940 and 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt sent aid to China formally, including war equipment. In this video, we will see why Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Keep watching. The day of the attack on December 7, 1941. On one Sunday, starting at 7:55 a.m. in Hawaii time, the first Japanese dive bomber was seen entering Pearl Harbor airspace, piloted by Captain Mitsuo Fukuda. As the leader of the attack group that day, he lit a green smoke to tell other pilots that the attack would go ahead as planned, and it was a surprise attack on the U.S. forces. A message code Tora Tora Tora, which is short for torpedo attack, was sent to the aircraft carrier Akagi. Prior to that, U.S. military radar had detected a large group of aircraft heading towards Pearl Harbor from the north at 7:02 a.m. but expected them to be B-17s arriving from the U.S., and no further warning was issued. Captain Mitsuo Fukuda led the first attack group, which consisted of 183 aircraft including torpedo planes or bombers and other fighters. In the first 5 minutes, 40 Japanese military torpedo planes targeted the main U.S. battleships, namely California, Oklahoma, West Virginia, and Nevada. Arizona, the largest and most powerful warship at the time, was bombed by 49 bombers, each weighing 800 kilograms, and finally exploded. It killed a total of 1,177 ship's crew, which is almost half of the casualties that day. Within 30 minutes, great destruction occurred against U.S. warships. All 8 U.S. warships at Pearl Harbor were damaged, but only the Arizona was completely sunk. Then, the second attack began at 8:50 a.m., where another 171 Japanese aircraft arrived with 54 Japanese bombers which were targeted at the Pearl Harbor Air Base area, dropping 2 bombs each. Out of 126 U.S. aircrafts, 42 were destroyed, 41 were damaged, and only 43 were still operational. About 360 Japanese Air Force aircrafts bombed the U.S. Naval Base Pearl Harbor in 2 phases of the attack, which lasted for 1 hour and 15 minutes. However, 29 Japanese military aircrafts were shot down with 55 casualties. A few hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Empire of Japan also launched an attack on the Southeast Asian region of Hong Kong, Malaya, and the Philippines, launched by the Imperial Japanese Army, or IJA. In a few weeks, Japan managed to eliminate the European colonial power in the Southeast Asian region, which had been built up over several thousand years. The propaganda such as Japan Protector of Asia and Asia for Asia were chanted to highlight the character of the Japanese Empire as the protector of the Asian people from the greed of Western colonialists. Why Japan attacked Pearl Harbor? The Japanese Empire attacked Pearl Harbor due to the political interests of becoming a world power, seeking new economic resources, and a response from the trade embargo from the U.S. To show that Japan can be a world superpower, Western powers conquered many areas, including Asia, to seek the Earth's resources for the needs of the industrial era of their respective countries. The Japanese Empire also wanted to achieve a rapid industrial revolution, and with the rapid growth of the Japanese economy, it was able to cover more than its own domestic needs and began to expand to foreign markets. Therefore, the country needs more raw resources from outside because it lacks natural resources. Japan's economy is also heavily dependent on trade by sea, making naval strength especially important. By 1937, at the insistence of the Japanese Navy, the Prime Minister at the time, Fumimaro Konoye, conquered China. Between December 1937 and January 1938, a black event known as the Nanjing Massacre and Rape of Nanjing, where historians estimate that 300,000 Chinese people were killed, besides women and girls were raped by the Japanese army. After 1939, Japan wanted to continue to dominate areas outside of China, and at the beginning there was a difference of opinion among the Japanese military, whether they wanted to expand their power towards the north by targeting the Soviet Union, or south to the Indochina area, namely Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. In June 1940, the Japanese Empire decided to conquer the area in the south, which is Indochina and Southeast Asia. Then, the Japanese Empire desired to achieve its main ambition, which is to dominate the Asia-Pacific region and become a feared world power. Trade restrictions by the U.S. against Japan. The U.S., angered by Japan's aggressive actions against China, besides wanting to protect its interests in Asia, began imposing economic sanctions on Japan. All Japanese-owned assets and banks in the U.S. were frozen. Japan was largely dependent on crude oil imports from the U.S., but oil reserves at that time could only last up to 3 years. With Japan's participation in the World War II, there was more pressure on Japan to do something to get oil supplies from other areas such as Southeast Asia. In addition, Japan was also in great need of other raw materials such as tin and rubber, which can be obtained in Indochina and Malaya for the country's industrial needs. Weakening the U.S. military in the Pacific. At that time, diplomatic negotiations between Japan and the U.S. were also deadlocked, and U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt at the time, along with his advisors, had assessed the possibility of an attack from the Japanese. However, the aspects of resistance and security in Pearl Harbor were not improved because they did not think that Japan could attack the Hawaiian Islands, which are more than 6,000 kilometers away from the Japanese islands. However, the Japanese aircraft that attacked Pearl Harbor all departed from 6 Japanese Navy carriers. Admiral Yamamoto Isoroku, the Japanese war strategist, had been planning for months to make an attack on Pearl Harbor. Effects of the Pearl Harbor attack. As soon the news of the attack reached the U.S., the anti-Japanese sentiment began to spread to the Americans. Settlements were built to isolate individuals of Japanese descent. Before the attack on Pearl Harbor, most Americans were divided about the country's participation in World War II. The day after the attack, the U.S. Congress in session declared war on the Empire of Japan, with U.S. citizens coming together to support the government's efforts. With abundant resources of labor and raw materials, the U.S. was able to develop a military industry for its own country and its allies, such as Great Britain and the Soviet Union. The U.S. economy began to boom with the manufacture of military equipment, and new job opportunities began to grow for the people. The budget for defense also increased drastically, from $1.5 billion in 1940 to $81.5 billion in 1945. In 1944, the U.S. became the world's main supplier of weapons and began to play a key role in world security issues after the Second World War until today. In conclusion, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor is an important history not only for the U.S., but for the world, because it is said to be a compelling cause of the victory of the Allies. The surprise attack of the Japanese Empire had caused this great power to begin to show its true strength and capabilities. Eventually, the Japanese Empire, after a long time, ended with 2 atomic bombs dropped by the U.S. on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Japanese army, known for its aggressive nature and courage, was completely crippled following the attack. Thank you for watching.